إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So inshallah ta'ala, in this brief lecture we're going to discuss some of the virtues of Ramadan that is coming up shortly, and some of the fiqh issues that surround this month of Ramadan, some of the do's and the don'ts, some of the sunnah acts that have been mentioned, so that we're ready and we're prepared for this month. Firstly then, as an introduction to Ramadan, as you know in Arabic they call it Sawm or Siyam. But what does this word actually mean? What does the word Sawm and Siyam mean? They say that in Arabic this word, it means al-imsak, to hold back and to restrict yourself. So holding back and restricting yourself from whatever that might be is linguistically known as Siyam and Sawm. So I could say I am doing Sawm from speaking. That would mean I'm sitting here silently, not talking. I am restricting myself and holding myself back from speech. So linguistically in Arabic that is known as Sawm or Siyam, that I'm holding back and I'm not speaking. And that's mentioned in the Quran even. There's an ayah in Surah Maryam, ayah number 26. إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ سَوْمًا فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنسِيًّا. That I have vowed to Ar-Rahman Sawm, so I will not speak to anyone today. So here the Sawm wasn't talking about fasting, what we know fasting to be. Sawm here in this ayah was talking about not speaking, holding back and restricting yourself from speech. So that's what the word Sawm or Siyam means in the Arabic language. As for Islamically, when we talk about Sawm and Siyam, when we talk about the hadith, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج البيت. When we talk about this hadith that Islam is built upon 5 pillars, the testification that none has the right to be worshipped in truth except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and that you must establish the prayer and give the zakat and the Sawm and the hajj. In this hadith, the Sawm isn't just talking about holding back and restricting yourself in an absolute way. It's talking about it in a specific way, the Islamic way. And the Islamic legislated type of Siyam, or holding back and restricting yourself, is when a person makes the intention to hold back and to restrict yourself from all of those types of things that will break your fast, whether that's eating or drinking or intercourse, those types of activities. You make an intention that you will hold yourself back, restrict yourself from all of those types of acts that would break your fast from Fajr, the second Fajr, the time of the Adhan for the Fajr, up until Maghrib. That is the Sawm that we are talking about when we speak about it Islamically. To make an intention to hold back from all of those things, eating, drinking, intercourse, etc., from Fajr to Maghrib. And that's what this particular issue is about, and that's what Ramadan is regarding. So as for the obligation of fasting, now that we've understood the meaning of the word, the obligation of fasting that is mentioned in the Quran. Allah told us in the Quran that we have to fast. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. That all you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you, just as it was prescribed upon those who came before you, so that you may attain piety. So we know here that Allah has prescribed, obligated fasting upon us. And we also understand that nations that came before us, before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fasting was also prescribed upon them. They used to have some form of fasting too, because the ayah tells us fasting is prescribed upon you just as it was prescribed upon those who came before you. What is the purpose of fasting then? Why do we fast and what is the benefit to be taken from it? Then that is, as this ayah itself just mentioned also, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you might obtain or attain piety. Piety is a consequence of fasting. That is something that you achieve through fasting. But what is piety then? If we now understand that the ayah is telling us you achieve piety through fasting, then we need to understand what this piety is. Taqwa. What is the definition of taqwa? Anybody? Taqwa. When we talk about taqwa, the muttaqeen, who are they? What is taqwa? Fear of Allah. Anything more than that? It's true, fear of Allah. How? Are there more details? Taqwa, they say, you can take it as a definition. They say taqwa is that there's 6 parts, 3 and 3. That you fulfill the obligations Allah has prescribed upon you. Fulfill the obligations Allah has placed upon you upon understanding and knowledge. Not just do whatever you want and worship however you want, but to worship Allah with the correct understanding, desiring the reward of Allah. Some people may do that, showing off in front of other people. They may do it for other reasons. But taqwa is that you fulfill the obligations, that's part 1. Upon knowledge and understanding, upon light, insight, that's part 2. Desiring the reward of Allah, that's part 3. Then there's 4, 5 and 6 on the other hand. And you also stay away from the prohibitions that Allah has told us to stay away from, upon understanding again, knowing what they are and staying away from them. And why do you do that? Fearing the punishment of Allah. So when you do those 6 parts together, that is taqwa. Fulfill the obligations upon knowledge and understanding, desiring the reward of Allah, and stay away from the prohibitions upon knowledge and understanding, fearing the punishment of Allah. That is what some of the Salaf they used to say regarding what taqwa is. And so if you implement that and you practice that, then that is the obtainment of taqwa. Fulfilling the rights of Allah and staying away from the prohibitions. And what is the greatest of the rights of Allah and what is the greatest of the prohibitions? We've already been told in the hadith of Muadh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu, when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to him, Ya Muadh, atadri ma haqqu Allahi ala al-ibad wa ma haqqu al-ibadi ala Allah? O Muadh, do you know what the right of Allah is upon His servants and what the right of the servants is upon Allah? Muadh ibn Jabal said, Allah wa rasuluhu a'lam. Allah and His Messenger know best. He didn't know. He said, Allah and His Messenger know best. Even though nowadays, if somebody asks you and you don't know, all you say is, Allah knows best. You don't add the second part, and His Messenger knows best. That was at that time because the revelation was still coming down. Now the revelation is finished. So now you just say, Allah knows best. The Messenger has already told us everything. Now the revelation is done. So now you say, Allahu a'lam. But then, because the revelation was still coming, then they would say, Allahu wa rasuluhu a'lam. And His Messenger knows best. Because maybe some more revelation may come to the Messenger at that time. So he said, Allahu wa rasuluhu a'lam. Then the Prophet ﷺ told him, he said, حَقُّ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ أَنْ يَعْبُدُوهُ وَلَا يُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. The right of Allah upon His servants is that they worship Him and do not commit any form of shirk, associating partners to Allah in any way, shape or form, making dua to somebody else, going to the graves and asking them to take your dua to Allah. Some of the people do, saying this is intercession. All of these types of acts, your dua is done to Allah directly. Your other forms of worship are done to Allah directly. وَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. Do not call upon others besides Allah. That is the right of Allah upon us. Just as Allah said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created jinn and humans except to worship me upon tawheed. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَحَقُّ الْعِبَادِ عَلَى اللَّهِ أَنْ لَا يُعَذِّبَ مَنْ لَا يُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. The right of the servants upon Allah is not that we actually have any rights upon Allah. The meaning of the hadith isn't that we have rights upon Allah. The meaning of it is a virtue or a blessing that Allah has given us. And what is that virtue and blessing that Allah has given us? أَلَّا يُعَذِّبَ مَنْ لَا يُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا, that Allah will not punish the one who does not commit shirk. And that's what's mentioned in the various texts of the Quran and the Sunnah. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon tawheed and do not commit any type of shirk. That is the ultimate type of worship and the ultimate sin in the opposite, the shirk. So this is taqwa, that a person attempts to achieve that. That is at the head of it, the tawheed and the shirk. Then below that are all of the other affairs of the obedience to Allah and staying away from the prohibitions, from the various forms of prayer and zakat and goodness and charity, goodness to your parents, etc. There's many things. All of that comes under then achieving this piety. One of the scholars, Shaykh Salih Al-Fawzan, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, you may have heard of him. He says, Al-hikmatu min mashru'iyyati as-siyam zahira. He says the wisdom behind the legislation of fasting is clear. لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى, due to the statement of Allah in the Quran, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may attain this piety. لِأَنَّهُ يَمْنَعُ النَّفْسَ من الشهوات والأكل والشرب والجماع لأن هذه الأمور تحمل النفوس على الطغيان وعلى الغفلة. Because fasting, it causes you to be able to be patient and restrict yourself. It stops you from your desires because you have a lack of food, a lack of drink, a lack of relations with the family, intercourse, etc. All of that is stopped during Ramadan, during the days. So when all of that is stopped, no food, no drink, no desires in terms of intercourse, etc. all of that is stopped. It causes the soul to strengthen itself on the obedience of Allah, because you don't have to think about these other things. That's why the scholars, they used to say, don't eat too much and don't drink too much. Eating too much and drinking too much, it makes you negligent from worshipping Allah. Relaxing with the 3 course and the cakes and the desserts and everything, it makes you negligent from worshipping. And that's why the scholars, they used to eat a little, because the less you have in your stomach, just the right amount, then it makes you focused with your studies. But if your stomach is too full, too much food, then the mind cannot concentrate. You become negligent of the worship of Allah. So here the fasting, it prevents those things. Similarly, we know in a hadith that the shaitan yajri min ibn Adam majra dam, that the shaitan runs through the people like the blood runs through the veins and the arteries. This is the example given in one of the hadith. The shaitan runs through the people like blood runs through your veins and arteries. So when you don't eat and you don't drink, those veins and arteries become restricted somewhat. There's not as much blood flowing through, there's no food, no drink. So that restricts the shaitan also. Due to these types of reasons, it's mentioned that the righteous people of the past, the Salaf, and those who came after them, they used to fast a lot outside of Ramadan too. Ramadan, of course, obligation. But even outside of Ramadan, they used to fast a lot because of these benefits. They knew that fasting, it causes you to focus your mind on the worship of Allah. It stops you from these other desires and food and drink and negligence. It makes you worship Allah and do the supplications and the remembrance better and greater. So they used to fast a lot even outside of Ramadan. That's something that's mentioned about the people of the past and their piety, and that's because they understood the importance of Ramadan and they understood the virtues of it. In one hadith it's mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this hadith, which is hadith Qudsi, that the fasting is for me, as-sawmu li wa ana ujzi bih. That this fasting, it is done for me, for Allah. And that I will reward those people upon that fasting. Because fasting is an action that nobody can see. Any one of us in this room right now might be fasting. Nobody knows. We don't know who's fasting and who's not. It's an action that can't be seen. It's an action that is done for Allah. You can't really show off and fast. I mean, it could be done. You could tell people I'm fasting, etc. That's a type of showing off too. When you tell people about the worship you do. It's not just about doing it in front of them and they can see you. That's one type of showing off. The other type is that you do something secretly maybe. Maybe you get up at night to pray the night prayer. But then next day you go tell the people that I'm feeling a bit tired today because I was up all night praying. And you want people to praise you for that. That's a type of showing off too. But anyway, here it's mentioned that fasting is for Allah and Allah rewards those people. Similarly, in another hadith it says, or in the same hadith, إِنَّهُ تَرَكَ شَهْوَتَهُ وَطَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ مِنْ أَجْلِي, that a person has left his food and drink and desires for my sake. For my sake. وَلَخَلُوفُ فَمِ الصَّائِمِ أَطْيَبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ رِيحِ الْمِسْكِ, and the smell that comes from the mouth of a fasting person, then that is more fragrant to Allah than the misk itself, the beautiful fragrance. And that is because this is a sign of worship. An individual is doing that for the sake of Allah. So there are great benefits behind this month of Ramadan. An individual who uses it properly, uses it wisely, in obedience to Allah, in praying, in fasting, in recitation of the Quran, then there's many rewards to be had. Also, we'll have a look at some of the fiqh of Ramadan now, so that we're prepared and we understand some of the general rulings about Ramadan. We'll mention some of the hadith from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in Bukhari, Muslim, other places about Ramadan. There is one hadith narrated by Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تقدموا رمضان بصوم يوم أو يومين إلا رجل كان يصوم صوما فليصم. Then there's another hadith of Ammar ibn Yasir. Well, that hadith means that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not precede Ramadan by fasting an extra day or two before Ramadan begins, except somebody who has a habit of doing that. Meaning, let's say for example, Ramadan was going to begin on a Friday. We just so happened to work out, roughly it's going to be either Friday or Saturday. You always know down to one of 2 days. So it's going to be a Friday or a Saturday. Somebody comes along and says, well, in that case, I'm going to start fasting from Wednesday. I'm going to start getting myself sorted out and start fasting from Wednesday, 2 days in advance. And that will just be in amongst Ramadan. I'll add those 2 days on and I'll get the reward for the whole bunch, 32, 33 days. That isn't correct. You're not supposed to add extra days before Ramadan begins. Those last 1 or 2 days before Ramadan begins, you're not supposed to add those extra. Why? Because of this next hadith. من صام اليوم الذي يشك فيه فقد عصى أبا القاسم. In this narration of Ammar ibn Yasir, the companion radiyallahu anhu, he says, whoever fasts on the day of doubt, then he has sinned against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is the day of doubt? Now, for example, we are in the month of Sha'ban. On the 29th day of this month, then on that evening, after the 29th day finishes, after Maghrib on the 29th day, that night begins, that evening begins. That is the night of the 30th. As you know, Islamically, the night comes before the day. So, for example, today is Saturday, huh? Today is Saturday. Saturday, huh? Today is Saturday. So after Maghrib, today, the night which starts, the evening which starts, is going to be the night of Sunday. Islamically, that's the night of Sunday. The night comes before the day. So on the 29th day of the month, of this month, when you finish the 29th day, after Maghrib, the night of the 30th day has started. That night, it's possible the moon might come out for Ramadan. Because Islamically, a month can either be 29 days or 30 days. So that night, it's possible the moon might come out. Then again, it might not. So you end up finishing 30 days for Sha'ban and then you begin your Ramadan. But that night, there's a chance it could come out. So the people, they go out and they look for the moon, but nobody sees it. There's cloud cover, there's mist, there's fog, there's all types of things, and nobody catches sight of the moon. Nobody's seen it, but there's a chance it could have been there. Mist and fog and everything prevented you. There was a chance it could have been there. So the next day could possibly be Ramadan. Then again, it might not have actually been there, and next day might still be the 30th of Sha'ban. So what do you do on that day? Do you fast it or not? No. Unanimous. So that's what this narration mentions. Whoever fasts on that day When you haven't seen the moon, you're just doubtful. Maybe it was there, but we missed it. That's a doubt. You haven't actually seen it. There is no witnessing of the moon. Then in that case, this hadith and these narrations mentioned, don't fast on that day. Don't fast on that day because there's no sighting of the moon. If the moon's been sighted, fair enough. If it hasn't been sighted, then in that case, continue and finish 30 days of Sha'ban first. That is proven even more by the narrations, the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. There's a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar, radiyallahu anhuma. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَسُومُوا وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَأَفْطِرُوا فَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ فَاقْدِرُوا لَهُ مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, if you see it, i.e. the moon, فَسُومُوا, then begin Ramadan, start fasting. When you get sight of the new moon, begin the month. And when you see it again, do Eid. When you see it again, i.e. at the end of the month, for the next month, when you see it then, Eid. So when you see the moon the first time at the beginning of the month, Ramadan begins. At the end of the month, when you see the moon again, it stops and Eid starts. But then the hadith says, فَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ, if it's covered, cloud cover, mistiness, haziness, you can't see, then what do? فَقْدِرُوا لَهُ, then estimate. How do you estimate? We've been told in the Sunnah. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim which says, فَإِذَا أُغْمِيَ عَلَيْكُمْ فَقْدِرُوا لَهُ ثَلَاثِينَ. If it's covered up and you can't see the moon, there's haziness, fog, everything, clouds, then make an estimation, 30 of 30 days. Meaning Sha'ban, if you don't see it on the night of the 30th, estimate Sha'ban for the 30th day to be Sha'ban, and then start your Ramadan afterwards. In Bukhari, the same thing. فَأَكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّ 30. Complete 30 days of Sha'ban first then. Then begin the next day of Ramadan after that. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what the Sunnah tells us. Clear hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. But people nowadays, what will they do? Even if across the world, everywhere, there is no testimony of any Muslim in any country seeing the moon. Nowhere. Some people will still start fasting. Why? Because they'll say, the weather report yesterday said the moon was supposed to come out today. Only for 2.5 minutes, but it was supposed to come out. So they'll start fasting. That's a mistake. Even if the weather report tells you the moon is coming out or not coming out. Maybe sometimes the weather report might say that on the night of the 30th, the moon cannot come out. It's impossible, they say. But maybe in certain Muslim countries, there are reliable Muslim witnesses who see it. So what do? You fast. The Muslims have witnessed the moon, irrelevant of what their astrology and their weather equipment tells you. That's not what you base your religion upon. That's not what you worship Allah with. You don't worship Allah with these metaphysics and whatever. You worship Allah with the sighting of the moon. So even if they say it can't be out on the night of the 30th, but it's witnessed, then you follow that witnessing. Even if they say it is going to come out, but nobody witnesses it anywhere, then implement these narrations and don't fast until the next day. Even if they say it was out tonight. Nobody saw it. It wasn't witnessed. And they themselves will tell you. The Met Office and these scientific research places, even they'll say it's a best guess, 99%. Even they won't tell you with absolute definitiveness the moon cannot come out tonight. Even they won't say that. So for them, it's a 99% best guess with the way the moon is moving, etc. We don't think it's going to come out tonight. Okay, that's their best guess, that's their science. We base our religion upon witnessing and these narrations. If the moon is witnessed, fast. That's what the hadith says. إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ, if you see it, fast. If you don't see it, finish 30 days and then begin Ramadan. Simple. If everybody just practiced that, there would be one beginning of Ramadan and one Eid. There wouldn't be so much conflict amongst the people here. Yes, there is an issue regarding following the closest Muslim country. Some people follow that opinion. That's an opinion some of the scholars they mention. After that, how do we know about the witnessing of the moon? Who has to witness it? And this will prove to you even more that the Met Office and these scientific research places, they can't be used. There's a hadith here now of Ibn Abbas. He says, رضي الله عنهما, أن أعرابيا جاء إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال إني رأيت الهلال فقال أتشهد أن لا إله إلا الله قال نعم قال تشهد أن محمدا رسول الله قال نعم قال فأذن في الناس يا بلال أن يصوموا غدا. A Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I've seen the new moon, I've witnessed it. So the first thing the Prophet ﷺ said to him was, do you bear testification to La ilaha illallah? He said yes. Then the Prophet ﷺ said to him, do you bear testification that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah? He said yes. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, in that case Bilal, go and tell the people we're starting fasting tomorrow. What does this hadith prove? Proves that the person who sees the moon and makes the testimony for it has to be a Muslim. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was asking this person who was claiming to have seen the moon, do you testify to La ilaha illallah? Do you testify to Muhammadun Rasulullah? When he said yes to all of that, then the Prophet ﷺ said, in that case, okay, we'll accept your testimony. Bilal, tell the people we're fasting tomorrow. If the person had said, no, I'm not a Muslim, I don't testify to any of that, it wouldn't have been accepted. So the testimony comes from a Muslim, reliable witness, male or female. Male or female, even if it was a woman, a sister. She sees the moon and she goes and tells the authorities and the announcement is made, you fast upon that. Male or female, Muslim witness. That's how Ramadan begins. Then with regards to the intention, there are two hadith that are mentioned with regards to the intention. One hadith of Hafsa, al-Mu'mineen, one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من لم يبيت النية قبل الفجر فلا صيام له. Whoever does not make his intention for the fasting the night before, at Fajr time, before Fajr, then there's no fast for him. You have to have made your intention in the evening, the night before, at Fajr time, in the morning of Suhoor. You have to make your intention then for the fast for the day. But then there's another hadith which is in Sahih Muslim, which is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha. She says, دخل علي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم فقال هل عندكم شيء؟ قلنا لا. قال فإني إذن صائم. Al-Hadith. She says on one occasion the Prophet ﷺ, he came home in the middle of the day, at some point during the day, he was out and he came. And he said, Aisha radiallahu anha says, he then said to me, do we have anything at home? Anything to eat? Is there any food? Aisha radiallahu anha said, La, we've got nothing. Currently we don't have anything to eat at the house. So the Prophet ﷺ said, in that case, I'm just going to fast for the day. That shows that from Fajr that day all the way up until this moment when the Prophet ﷺ walked into the house in the middle of the day, he hadn't eaten anything. He hadn't eaten anything all day, ﷺ, or engaged in any of the other activities, relations with the family, etc., that would break your fast. He hadn't done any of those acts up until that time in the middle of the day, whenever it was. When he found out there was no food, he said, okay, in that case, haven't eaten anything all day anyway, not done any of the other things, I'll just make it a fast for the day. So here the Prophet ﷺ obviously hadn't made his intention in the morning. He hadn't. He was actually going to eat. He was asking for food, but there wasn't any, so he said, okay, in that case I'll make the intention and fast. So how do we understand this then? One hadith says you've got to do it in the morning. In the morning at Fajr time. The other one says no, any time. In the middle of the day. Here the Prophet ﷺ just fasted there and then because he hadn't eaten anything all day anyway. So what do we do? What do we do? We need an answer. Ramadan is coming soon. Anyone? Any suggestions? How can we understand these two narrations? We understand them. There are two types of fasting. One is obligatory, one is optional. Obligatory is Ramadan. Optional is any time in the year, Monday, Thursday, the 3 days in the middle of the month. Those are optional fasts, anytime you want. The obligatory fasts, you must make your intention in the morning, Fajr time. Must be before that. The optional fasts, anytime. If today, for example, now, if there's somebody in this room, for example, now, who hasn't eaten or drunk anything since before Fajr this morning, and they haven't engaged in any of the other activities of intercourse, etc., none of those things have happened, and you haven't eaten or nothing up until now, you can make the intention now and carry on for another 3 or 4 hours and then open your fast at Maghrib. It's a fast. Optional. That's the optional ones. The obligatory ones, you can't do that. The obligatory ones, you've got to make your intention prior, before Fajr. That's the understanding of the two narrations, and that's how you combine between those evidences. Then also some of the sunnah acts that you're supposed to do in Ramadan. There's a hadith of Sahal ibn Sa'ad, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, رضي الله عنهما, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, لا يزال الناس بخير ما عجل الفطر. That's in Bukhari and Muslim. He said, the Prophet ﷺ said, the people will continue to be upon goodness. The people will not cease to be upon goodness as long as they make the iftar at the right time, at the beginning time. As soon as Maghrib starts, the adhan goes, you can open your fast. That's what the hadith says. Those who make the opening of the fast quickly, at the right time. What do some people do? You know, some people, they do it. After the adhan goes for Maghrib, they say, no, wait. Give it another 10 minutes, just to be certain. Let the sun completely go. We can be certain that, we got the reward for the day, then open it. Give it 10 minutes. That's what they'll do. Some people do that. It's a mistake. You shouldn't do that. That's against the sunnah. The sunnah is that as soon as the time comes, the Maghrib adhan is done. If it's done at the right time, of course, then you open your fast there and then. That's the sunnah. That's where the barakah is. The hadith also says, the next one of At-Tirmidhi from Abu Hurairah, قال الله عز وجل أحب عبادي إلي أعجلهم فطرا. That the most beloved of my servants to me are the ones who make their iftar quickly at the beginning time, as soon as the time comes. Not they delay it and want to be sure and the sun's definitely gone down. When the time for Maghrib comes, do it. Those same people who say, but wait, the adhan for Maghrib has gone, let's give it another 15 minutes, just to make sure. The rest of the year outside of Ramadan, do you think they pray Maghrib 15 minutes late as well? In that case, for the rest of the year, they should say every time Maghrib adhan is done, no, wait. Give it 15 minutes, then we'll pray Maghrib, just to be sure. They don't do that. The rest of the year, they'll pray Maghrib as soon as the adhan is done. But when it's Ramadan, no, now we have to wait for a while. That shows you a contradiction anyway. But that's what you're supposed to do. The sunnah is to open your fast when the time comes straight away. What about suhoor? Suhoor, you're supposed to delay it right to the last possible time. The last possible time is the adhan for Fajr, the second adhan. Fajr can have two adhans, one early, prior, not that one. The second adhan for Fajr, then that adhan indicates that the time of Fajr has now begun. At that time, you stop eating and drinking. And that is going to be maybe 20 minutes before the congregation prayer. It's a mistake when people, you see some of these timetables, they say you have to stop eating at 1 a.m. I've seen them. In the summer months, they say you have to stop eating at 1 a.m. Some people have barely finished Taraweeh and the time's already finished. That's a mistake. The Fajr these days, it's approximately 3 o'clock, 3:30, around about that time. That's roughly when you're going to stop. When the Fajr time begins, not 2 hours before Fajr. If the congregation, the masjid is at 3:30, you don't stop eating at 1 a.m. You stop eating prior to the Fajr prayer when the adhan is 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever that is. That's the sunnah for suhoor. And it is blessed. It is sunnah to have suhoor. It's a mistake when people just go to bed and they don't bother. They think, I don't need it, I'm okay, I'm fit and healthy. I don't need a suhoor, I'm okay, I can last. Even so, suhoor is a sunnah to have. It's barakah within it. There's blessing within the suhoor. And it is in opposition to the other religions. You know, the Christians and the Jews, when they used to fast, they never used to take suhoor as a part of their way of fasting. So Muslims, they do the opposite to that. We take the suhoor and there's blessing in the suhoor. And we know that the Prophet said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever imitates a group of people, he's with them. He's like them. So you oppose that. Take the suhoor in the morning, because this hadith here says, the hadith of Anas ibn Malik, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Tasahharu fa inna fi suhoori barakah." Take the suhoor in the morning, because within that there is barakah, there is blessing. Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Then also the hadith of Salman ibn Amir radiyallahu anhu, عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا أفطر أحدكم فليفطر على تمر فإن لم يجد فليفطر على ماء فإنه طهور. That when one of you opens your fast, then open it with dates. And if you don't find any dates, then with water. Because indeed that is pure and purifying. This is the sunnah when opening the fast, to open it with dates. If you don't have any dates, then with water. If you don't have any dates or water, then whatever you have. But dates and the water, this is the sunnah. And then afterwards you can have the pizzas and the KFC and whatever. But the dates and the sunnah, the dates is the sunnah and the water is the sunnah first. And then after that, if you need more food, you have more whatever you need. Some people may not even need it. They have dates and water and a few small things, and that is sufficient for their iftar. And then they go for 2 or 3 hours and maybe later they eat something. But that is the sunnah, to open it with dates and with water. Then there is the issue regarding the types of actions that a person should engage in, or the types of actions rather that the person should not engage in when fasting. People seem to think fasting is just to not eat and drink and not have intercourse and those types of things. They don't realize that the other types of sins that occur, they are prohibited outside of fasting and in fasting. But when a person does these other types of sins, lying and deceiving and cheating and those types of things, they reduce the reward of an individual for that day's fasting. It's mentioned in some narrations that maybe a person fasts, but during the day he still lies about people, he still slanders people, still cheats and deceives, does all types of sins during the day anyway. Then that day, for all of those sins that he's done, the reward that he would have got for that days of fasting, that day's worth of fasting, the reward goes down every time he does a sin. Sometimes a person may do so many sins that his reward is virtually non-existent for that day, even though he's been fasting all day, because it's been eaten away by all of the sins that he's doing. Here there's a hadith about that. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من لم يدع قول الزور والعمل به والجهل فليس لله حاجة في أن يدع طعامه وشرابه. That whoever does not leave the false speech, قول الزور, all types of false speech, all types of evil speech, whoever doesn't leave that type of evil and false speech, lying, cheating, deceiving, backbiting, slander, all of which is haram. In one hadith it says, وَإِنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَيَتَكَلَّمُ بِكَلِمَةٍ مِّن سَخَطِ اللَّهِ لَا يُلْقِي لَهَا بَالًا يَهْوِي بِهَا إِلَى جَهَنَّمْ. That may be an individual, he speaks and he says something minor. He doesn't even pay attention to it, but it's something evil. It's backbiting somebody or it's slandering somebody. And he says it just a word off the tongue, doesn't concentrate on it, doesn't focus on it, he just says it and he forgets it. That word, even though he just said it and forgot about it, it was a minor thing, it was something evil. In the hadith it says that one word could be the reason why you end up in the hellfire. Because everything will be recorded. Inna alaykum lahafidhin kiraman katibin. We have upon you noble guardians writing down everything you do. So all of this type of false speech, it is impermissible. وَالْعَمَلَ بِهِ, and actions, person doing false actions. False actions in terms of cheating or deceiving. مَنْ غَشَّنَا فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, the Prophet said, whoever deceives and cheats us is not from us. And the hadith about when the Prophet walked past the grave of the two people and they were being punished in their grave. إِنَّهُمَا لَيُعَذَّبَانِ وَمَا يُعَذَّبَانِ فِي كَبِيرٍ أَوَى وَهُوَ كَبِيرٌ أما أحدهما فكان يمشي بالنميمة وأما الآخر فكان لا يستنزه من البول. The Prophet ﷺ said these two individuals are being punished in their graves. Why? One of them because he used to spread stories between people to cause corruption between them, storytelling, tale carrying, and the other one because he never used to look after himself when urinating. Splashes used to go everywhere, never used to clean himself properly. That is one of the reasons for the punishment of the grave. A person who doesn't look after himself when relieving himself. Because we know that Iman, it is purity. Iman is purity and cleanliness also. So these types of acts, whoever does them, وَالْجَهْلِ, jahl is stupidity and foolishness. A person who engages in all types of stupidity and foolishness and these types of acts that are not befitting. Anybody who does all of that, the false speech, the acting upon it, the false foolishness, these types of actions, whoever engages in them and is fasting, then the hadith says, فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ حَاجَةً فِي أَنْ يَدَعَ طَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ. Then there is no need for Allah for him to leave eating and drinking. He stopped eating and drinking because he's fasting. But at the same time, he's still going to lie about people. He's still going to backbite about people. Backbiting, Allah said in the Quran, أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. Would you like to eat the meat of your dead brother, the flesh of the dead brother? Would you like to eat that? You would dislike that and hate that. But they go and do all of these things anyway, and they are fasting. Then the hadith says, why have you stopped eating and drinking? Still lying, still cheating, still deceiving, still doing all types of haram. So a person must be aware that fasting isn't just stop eating and drinking, it's to stop doing all of these other types of sins too. That also comes in within fasting. Then we'll just mention one or two other points. One of them is regards to marital relations between the husband and the wife. What's allowed during Ramadan when you're fasting during the day? In the night, after Maghrib, up until Fajr, everything is allowed. Intercourse, etc., it's permissible. But during the day whilst you're fasting, then there is a hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha. قالت كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل وهو صائم ويباشر وهو سائم ولكنه أملككم لإربه متفق عليه. Hadith which is agreed upon by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Aisha radiyallahu anha said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to kiss his wives whilst he was fasting, and even engage in foreplay without intercourse, of course. That is not permitted during fasting. But the foreplay whilst he was fasting. However, Aisha mentions at the end, radiyallahu anha, he was able to control himself and restrict himself. That's what the hadith means. It doesn't mean therefore people come along and say, well, the hadith says the Prophet used to kiss his wives whilst he was fasting, therefore it's permissible, everybody can go and do that. It's not as simple as that. It is only allowed, as the scholars they say, for somebody who is able to control himself and his soul and his desires. As for an individual who can't and is going to lead to desire within himself, etc., this type of kissing or physical contact, then it's not permissible. That's why some of the scholars used to say this is only allowed for elderly people. Elderly people, they don't have that desire and there's no problem like that. So some scholars say this is only for the elderly people. But the others they mentioned, as long as you have the ability to control yourself. But the scholars they say young people with energy, with enthusiasm, energy, they're not able to control themselves in that way. And the desire will be aroused through physical contact, kissing. So that shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be done. But for the one who is able genuinely to control the affair, then it is permissible. After that, just a few other issues. Somebody eats and drinks forgetfully. You forget and you eat and drink during Ramadan, one of the days, you forget. Nowadays it's long. Ramadan opens, the fast opens at 9 p.m. in the evening. Maybe you've been to work all day. It's been a long day. You come home, you go straight to the fridge without thinking, and you have a juice. What happens now? Then you remember, we're in Ramadan. So what's the ruling on that day? You have to make it up again. What do you have to do? What's the ruling? It's allowed. What do you mean it's allowed? Correct, you're right. The hadith says, the hadith of Abu Hurairah, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من نسي وهو صائم فأكل أو شرب فليتم صومه فإنما أطعمه الله وسقاه. Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. That whoever forgets, genuinely forgets, and eats something or drinks something whilst they are fasting, then you can carry on and finish the rest of the day off. Fast for the rest of the day. Carry on. And that fast is okay. You don't have to make it up afterwards. It's not broken. If you genuinely forgot, and you ate something, drank something, then you remembered, carry on for the rest of the day fasting, and that is okay and it counts. You don't have to make it up afterwards. فَإِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَهُ اللَّهُ, because that is Allah who gave him that sustenance. So when a person eats or drinks forgetfully, it doesn't break your fast. You don't have to make it up. You carry on. But you must stop as soon as you remember. So imagine now a person he comes home and he's having that juice. He's gone through one sip and straight away he remembers. That's it. You have to stop. You can't say, well, the hadith said if you forget. I forgot, so I'll just drink the full cup, then I'll carry on. That is incorrect. Your fast is broken then. As soon as you remember, then you've got to stop. You pick up a Mars bar, you take one bite out of it, then you remember, the rest of it you'll have to leave it now. As soon as you remember, then you must stop and carry on. And that day counts. But if you remember and you still carry on, that breaks your fast then. Because then you've done it on purpose. Vomiting. The issue of vomiting. There's a hadith of Abu Hurairah also. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من ذرعه القيء فلا قضاء عليه ومن استقاء فعليه القضاء. That whomsoever makes himself vomit. Some people, they may do that from hunger or whatever. They make themselves vomit on purpose. Somebody who does that, that breaks your fast. If you make yourself vomit on purpose. But if from the hunger and the thirst and not feeling too well or whatever, you end up vomiting, not with you trying to do it on purpose, it just happens, then that doesn't break your fast and it is okay. What about traveling and journeying? When a person is on a journey, you're traveling somewhere, you're going somewhere far, do you still have to fast whilst you're on the journey or do you not? Here there are some narrations regarding that also. There's the hadith of Hamza ibn Amr al-Aslami radiyallahu anhu أنه قال يا رسول الله أجد بي قوة على الصيام في السفر فهل علي جناح؟ فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم هي رخصة من الله فمن أخذ بها فحسن ومن أحب أن يصوم فلا جناح عليه. Hadith in Sahih Muslim that when Hamza radiyallahu anhu said to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, O Messenger of Allah, I've got strength in me. I've got strength in me, even if I'm out on a journey. And imagine the journeys in those days, it wasn't cars and ACs. It was on the camel and the horse and the donkey in the desert and the sun. He said, I've got energy though. Even when I'm out on these long journeys, I can still fast. I can do it. So the Prophet, so he said, is there any problem with that? He said, is there any problem? Can I fast? Can I still do it if I'm traveling? Am I allowed to still carry on fasting? Because I've got the energy. So the Prophet ﷺ said that it is a license given to you by Allah. You have the license, you have the permission to not have to fast if you're traveling. That is true. If you're out on a journey, you don't have to fast. If you go out on some long journey somewhere outside of Gloucester, somewhere far, wherever it is, you don't have to fast on that day. You don't have to fast whilst you're traveling. But in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said to this companion, if you've got strength and it doesn't really bother you, then you can. And it's not a problem. So it's a choice. It comes back to you when you're traveling. Some scholars, they say you should just break your fast anyway, because this is a permission Allah's given you, so you should take that permission. Allah's given you the permission not to fast whilst you're traveling, so take the permission, even if you've got strength. Some scholars say that. Other scholars, they say, but if you've got strength and you don't want to have to make it up afterwards, and it's not a problem for you to fast whilst you're traveling, then fast, it's no problem. So that is an option a person has when they are fasting, that they can leave that day and make it up afterwards, or if you want to, you can still fast on that day if you please. That's some of the issues rounded off. We'll have to leave it at that. But if there's any questions on those issues so far, or anything else to do with Ramadan, or anything outside of that, then inshallah ta'ala we'll leave a bit of time now to take some questions and answers, and then we'll have to conclude upon that point. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. If sisters have any questions, they can put them forward on a piece of paper.
Just to clarify things, when you say about breaking fast,
Oh, yeah.
do you break when the adhan finishes or once it begins?
No, the adhan, once the adhan begins, you're allowed now. Because the adhan begins at the time of Maghrib, when the sun has gone. That's when you begin the adhan. So it's allowed. You are allowed to start opening your fast once the adhan begins.
And with Fajr, is it the other way around? Is it the same?
The Fajr is same. Once the adhan begins, you stop eating. Because the adhan now begins when the Fajr has begun. So you stop eating. But there's a hadith about the Fajr one. If you're in the middle of eating and the Fajr adhan goes, you can just finish off that bit. So if I was drinking my bottle of water and the adhan for Fajr goes, you're allowed to just carry on with your sip and finish it. That's allowed.
Okay. So just a few other questions.
Yeah.
You said like if you eat forgetfully, is it the same if you've got the food in your mouth, can you swallow it? Like if you remember?
No. Take it out, get rid of it.
Take it out.
If you eat it then, you've remembered and you've eaten. That breaks your fast. If it's in your mouth and you remember there and then that's it. Get it out of your mouth and don't eat it.
Okay. And also, when is it
Traveling, that's a difference of opinion between the scholars. What is actually a journey? There's lots of different things you'll hear from the scholars, from the books of fiqh, etc. Some scholars, they say a journey is if you leave your city. So what is this? Where are we now? This is called Gloucester, this city. Huh? So some scholars will say if you leave your city, you're a traveller. So if you go outside of Gloucester to the next city, wherever it is, 10, 15, 20 miles away, the next nearest city, you're a traveller. Some scholars say that. If you leave your city, you're a traveller. Other scholars say that some scholars mention the mileage, Some scholars say 40 miles, 80 kilometers. There's some distances mentioned like that. Some scholars say though, and this is a reasonable opinion too, they say it's about the tradition of the people. What is classed as a journey in the culture of the people? So now, what's your nearest town around here? Cheltenham. How far is that? 10 miles. So now when people go from Gloucester to Cheltenham, is that a journey? Would you pack your drinks and your crisps and check the oil in the car before you go to Cheltenham? You wouldn't. So the culture of the people is that it's not really a journey to go down to Cheltenham. That's the culture of the people. So that's not a journey. But if you were to go up to Birmingham, for example, people in their culture would think that's a bit of a trek. That's a bit far now. Now you've got to make sure you do have your mobile charged up and everything prepared before you go. So that in the culture is considered a journey. Some scholars say that's what you base it on. In your culture, everybody knows how far you need to go before everybody thinks that's a journey. Otherwise, 10, 15, 20 miles, maybe even 30 miles, people may think that's nothing. So then that's not a journey. So that's differed about. It's a bit difficult to really pinpoint what that would be.
Okay. And also, just another one. This is actually personal for myself. I have an operation just before the end of Ramadan. So obviously for that day I can't fast. What do I do in that situation? Because I don't.
Plus, if you have an operation, then you can't fast on that day. Just make it up afterwards.
Okay, so you make it up after.
Yeah, if you're going to be in an operation, and that operation, the way it's going to be done, the procedure, whatever, you can't fast that day. Then khalas, and if there's no other way of doing the operation outside of that day or whatever, then that day you can leave that and make it up at a later time.
Okay.
Because the rule, and there's a question here about ill people anyway as well. What if somebody is ill? Do they have to fast? If they can't, what must they do? Illness is different types. If somebody is chronically ill, it's an illness that doesn't go away. Some people have certain types of illnesses, they've always got them. There's no real cure, you can't really get rid of it. Maybe some people have that type of illness, so it carries on with them forever. It's always there. So whether it's Ramadan this year or next year, they just can't fast. So those people, it's mentioned, they can give some food instead for every day that they can't fast. Give some food in charity to the people who need it, etc. Somebody who gets ill temporarily, Ramadan comes along for a week in Ramadan, you get a heavy fever, you can't do anything, you can't fast, you need your water, you need your vitamin C, whatever. So that 1 week you couldn't fast. The other 3 weeks you were okay. After Ramadan, when you're healthy and fit again, make up your 1 week. If your illness is only temporary and afterwards you're going to get better, once you're better, make up what you missed. But if your illness is going to carry on, it's a type of illness that you can't fast. I think certain types of diabetes or whatever they are, they can't fast. So those people can never do it. They're never going to get better. It's just always there with them. They can't fast now, they can't make it up afterwards. So they can just give some food.
Okay, so one other thing. I suffer from asthma and sometimes the heat makes my asthma really bad.
Yeah, inhalers don't break your fast.
Okay.
Yeah, scholars, they mention that inhalers don't break your fast because it's not really any type of nutrition. It's like a whiff of air, some light powder. When it goes here, it's not really any nutrition to your body. It doesn't really give you nutritional value. So many of the scholars, Shaykh Uthaymeen, etc., they say it doesn't break your fast, the inhaler.
The ruling be if you were fasting and you went to a different country, like you were traveling, but you decided to fast that day.
So khalas, then when you get there, you can open the fast with them, with their time, when they're going to open their fast.
Also, do pregnant women have to fast?
Pregnant women, so if a woman is pregnant, it's up to her again. If she is fit and healthy and the doctor says, you're pregnant but there's no problem. You're fit and healthy, the child is fit and healthy. If you were to fast, it wouldn't really cause you any problem. And the woman in herself feels like she's fit and healthy. It's not really going to cause her problems. She's allowed to fast. If the woman is afraid, and especially these days are really long now, 18 hours, whatever, it's going to be a problem. Doctors say it's going to be a problem. Your child may not be able to cope like that for 18 hours without food or drink. Then she's allowed to not fast and make it up afterwards. After she's given birth, etc., then she can make up the fasting then.
Okay.
using the pill to delay the menses so you can fast the whole month. Some of the scholars, they mention about using the pill and that it's possible, but it's not recommended. I don't think the scholars, they say it's a recommended thing to do. This is a natural thing for the women. It's a natural thing. This is the way Allah created the people. So if that menses comes in that month, you leave those few days and make them up afterwards. That's simple, and just to do it that way. But sometimes some of the scholars do say it's okay to do that, especially in Hajj, when a woman wants to make sure she can finish her Hajj and the menses doesn't come. Some scholars say you can take the pill. But in Ramadan, I don't know if there's really a need. It's 5 or 6 or 7 days, and you can make those up afterwards after Ramadan anyway. Due to health reasons, if a person cannot fast, when do they pay the fitr money? Jazakallah khair. When that money, it can be paid anytime. It can be paid during Ramadan. A person can give that money now for every day they miss. It has to be for every day that they miss. So every day they miss, they need to find some, the details of that are more complicated, where you're going to send it, who you're going to give it to, and how you're going to find people to give it to. But all of that, you can do it there and then. You can do it during Ramadan, every day it can be done, or in one bulk amount. Some say you can't brush your teeth or have a shower while fasting. Allahu a'lam who those people are. You're allowed to have a shower, there's no problem with that. Just make sure you don't swallow any water. That's why when you make wudu, normally when you make wudu, you're supposed to, when you wash your mouth out, gargle. You're supposed to gargle when you wash your mouth out. But in Ramadan, there's a hadith that says, when you're fasting, make your wudu, but don't gargle. Because there's a chance the water might go down. So just put it there lightly. But you make your wudu. Make wudu, you have to put water into your mouth. So what about a shower? Shower completely permissible, there's no problem. Just make sure you don't swallow any water. Brushing your teeth, again, it's allowed. Toothpaste is allowed. Again, don't swallow it. Because the toothpaste, it has a taste to it, etc. If you swallow that, then it brings about different taste. Don't swallow it. Use the toothpaste, wash out your mouth properly. And it's okay, it's allowed. There's no problem with that. Siwak as well, using that. All of those are allowed.
I don't know if you heard this. The 2 weeks before Ramadan,
the middle night of Sha'ban. That's an innovation. People, there are some narrations that say that there are virtues for the middle day of Sha'ban, of this month, which is in about 3 or 4 days, I think.
okay.
It's going to come up now on Tuesday or Wednesday or something. And people, they celebrate that. They say there are hadith that say you have to pray on this night and you have to fast on that day and you get this many reward and that many reward. All of those narrations are either weak or they are fabricated. There's only one narration that I'm aware of that says there are some virtues to that day. But that's all it says, there are some virtues. It doesn't say you're supposed to stay up all night praying that night specifically, or that you're supposed to fast that day specifically. All of that is wrong. Making that day a specific day to fast on, or to pray the night prayer in, or to make food and invite people around, all of those acts are innovation. Sheikh Uthaymeen said that, Sheikh bin Baz said that, all of the scholars have said there is no authentic narration to celebrate that day. Aywa. Laylatul Qadr, at least there are authentic narrations that are mentioned about the virtues and the greatness of it. But this is a day where there's nothing mentioned anyway. They're all fabricated and weak. So we'll have to conclude there. For this, what we've done today, we've done that in brief. But there's a full series of lectures you can get if you want the full details and all that. It's on a website called learnaboutislam.co.uk. Learn about Islam as one word, learn about Islam, one word, .co.uk. There's a full series of lectures on this. It's called the chapter of fasting. About 7 lectures that goes through all of this in detail. We've really skimmed over that very quickly. But if you want to go through all the details and the different opinions of scholars and everything, we did it once before. It's on Learn About Islam, Bulugh al-Maram, the chapter of fasting. It's about 6, 7, 8, 9 lectures or something. So you can get that in detail there. The next lecture is going to be on Saturday, August the 24th. And the title and the time is yet to be confirmed. And there aren't going to be any lectures in Ramadan. So August the 24th, inshallah, Saturday, August the 24th. But you have some sort of system, some Twitter or mobile text or something. You can get everybody notified. طيب يا اخوان جزاكم الله خير. Inshallah we'll meet again at some point. Injections, if they have nutritional value, then you can't do it. Pink, I don't know what they are and stuff, but you need to ask the doctor. If they have any nutritional value to them, you can't take it. If there's absolutely no nutritional value, then it's okay.
So if you're a diabetic and you want to fast, you can't fast, can you?
I don't know, those illnesses, the doctor, whatever he tells you, if you can't do it, you can't do it. Then just make it up, or if you can't make it up at all, then just give in the charity. That website, learnaboutislam.co.uk, you get all sorts of things on there. It's all free download, all different lectures, different books, different topics, whatever you want to get, everything's there, you can download it for free.
They've been given the CD, everybody.
Oh, okay, which one's this?
This is the
Advice of the Muslim women. Okay, it's there. That's done by Learn About Islam, this particular CD. Yeah.